Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday. We have an amazing show for everybody today. What do we have, Krystal?
Indeed, we do. We got a great panel in the house. Chuck Rocha and Phil Wegman. We got Zed Jelani on. He's going to break down what exactly is going on with Substack and the new controversy surrounding it. We've got Jeff Stein on. He's going to break down Biden's tax plan and where the infrastructure bill is heading. But we wanted to start with the results of that Amazon union election down in Bessemer, Alabama.
Yeah, that's right. So let's put this up there on the screen. A fascinating post-mortem from one of the organizers there. Blowout in Bessemer, a post-mortem on the Amazon campaign from Jane McKelvey. This was in The Nation. So the final results of the vote were, quite simply a blowout. The vote was 738 in favor to 1,798 against. And something that she writes about here is that really, quote, the results were not surprising for reasons that have more to do with the approach used in the campaign itself than any other factor, which I thought was really interesting in order to see somebody who was actually involved within the campaign admit some of the missteps. There were some structural problems, which we're about to get to, but we should acknowledge, obviously, that there was an actual vote here. It does seem to have failed somewhat on the merits, and she goes into some of the reasons as to why exactly she thinks.
Yeah, so she wasn't directly involved in this drive. She's a veteran union organizer, Dr. McKelvey, and so she goes through some of the tactics that the organizers used on the ground that she thought were troubling and worrisome. In particular, remember how we covered the fact that the Amazon went out of their way to get the town to change the stoplight so that union organizers didn't have a chance to intercept workers while they're waiting there at the stoplight. And she said, look, that shouldn't have been the focus anyway. They should have been going door to door, having direct conversation with the workers. And she just noted some different things that some of the tactics used on the ground that may have contributed to the failure of this election. Zooming out from those specific tactics, however, I think this also, unfortunately, is entirely predictable, which is why when we've covered this, while we've covered it as an incredibly significant challenge to Amazon's hold on the labor market and their overwhelming power, we always knew this was a massively uphill fight. Why? Well, it's because of all of the structural reasons that have led to union decline in this country over the past 40 years. You have in Bessemer, a city that has struggles with poverty, very little in the way of other employment. So Amazon's basically the only game in town. That gives them a massive amount of power, and they're especially kind of the only $15 game in town. So that's one piece of this, is just the monopoly power that Amazon has. Once you get down to the system where basically it's like, okay, you can work at Walmart or you can work at Amazon. Amazon pays a little bit more. You've got very little other options out there, and the bar has been really set low in terms of what workers even expect or think that they deserve in this world. That's one of the structural factors. And then, of course, the other structural factor that we've been covering here and why the PRO Act is so incredibly important is that employers have all kinds of tools that they are able to use, both legal and illegal, in order to intimidate and bully and coerce workers. Unions have very little tools at their disposal. And also importantly, and in a minute I'm going to go through, the PRO Act again and why that's so significant. Also, part of what's coming out of here is the union wasn't really able to make their case, and that's part of what the Dr. McKelvey was saying here, that they would significantly be able to improve workers' lives.
Yes.
And that is, it's maybe both a failure of the organizers on the ground, but it's also a failure of a system in which it's actually true. Even if you unionize, because the employers still have so many tools at their disposal, it weakens unions. It weakens their ability to provide for their membership. So when you have this structure that is so unbalanced towards the corporations, it would be like betting in favor of the workers, and this would be like betting on the casino to lose. Like the house always wins, and in America, the house is the corporation. Occasionally you can sneak one by, you can get one by here or there, this or that workplace can organize, but overall, if you're looking at this, you always have to expect that the house is going to ultimately prevail, especially in a high-stakes situation like this, where Amazon knew a lot was on the line.
Right. So what happens here is it becomes self-fulfilling prophecy, which is that the less people who are in a union, the less the benefits of the union are there, and the less the people know about the benefits of the union, which just becomes like this hamster wheel in which unions have less power, corporation has more power. You basically have that over time with the lowest level of unionization since before the Great Depression, historically low in the United States, despite the fact that unions have better favorability than ever, all of that, it doesn't matter because people actually still don't actually pay a lot of their dues within unions. And so they don't understand some of the benefits that come from that. We're talking now about an entire generation of the labor force removed from even having a parent who was in a union or who knew somebody who benefited from a union. So that's the other part of the problem. We should also mention, I mean, the union is challenging some of the results of the vote.
Yeah.
Let's put this up there on the screen. They're basically talking there about challenging 500 different ballots. And of the 500 ballots cast, they're being challenged, but largely over whether it was around the way that it was counted. They confirmed that the challenge ballots are, quote, at a rate of nearly 4-1. The NLRB is also, according to the union, going to be making some of the challenges there. But it does only account for about 15% of the 3,215 votes that were cast overall. So I don't want to give everybody a false picture because it does show you there that, yes, while this is part of the problem. The deck is stacked, and the Amazon went to they tried to do mail-in voting, or tried to go against mail-in voting. They only wanted in person. And in terms of the way that they tried to engineer so much of this vote, they certainly did everything they could. But at the same time, it does seem to be a failure of a lot of organization. And something I found really fascinating. This was actually in the New York Times. Let's put this up there on the screen. This was actually from one of the workers there. And according to them, now this is a black woman, a 52-year-old black woman, Mrs. Stokes there. She was told that the union organizers, seemingly like young progressive activists, coming and trying to talk about it as an extension of the Black Lives Matter movement. And she said this was not an African-American issue. She was talking there about being comfortable without being harassed. And she wanted to know how the union was actually going to benefit her life. Again, a 52-year-old black 52 worker in Amazon who was like, hey, I make $15 an hour. I actually do have health care. So what are you going to do for me? And you're like, identity politics platitudes, they just fall flat. And this is a very good test case. This is a majority black workforce down there. So how did it work out for you? Once again, talking in this racial politics without at all, at least seemingly, been able to make the case on what exactly you're going to do for workers, they're going to reject you overwhelmingly.
I think it's always important to listen to the actual workers.
Exactly.
What they say their experience of the organization drive was like and the concerns that they have rather than just imagining what those concerns might have been. That being said, look, this is one worker and I don't want to judge the organizers here too harshly because I wasn't on the ground. I don't know what tactics were used. I don't know how overwhelmingly the messaging was around this is what we can do for you and your job versus these sort of more high-minded appeals to a national movement versus super concrete in your life, this is what it's going to do for you. I will say one of the things that I was worried about that we pointed to here as well is, look, for these workers who decided they wanted to organize, what they were talking about were things that were super concrete, like, I can't go to the bathroom without being afraid of being fired. We're treated like robots. We're treated like we're second-class citizens. All this security technique, all the way that they control our time in our day is onerous and it's really undignified and makes us feel less than. So very concrete things like we want to be able to go to the bathroom without fearing for our job. And so anytime you have a thing like this that starts with the workers on the ground that's super concrete and it gets turned into this kind of national flashpoint, I always wondered if that was ultimately going to be an issue because the national political lens that's being applied to this is different than the super bread and butter concerns that workers are weighing on the ground. And also, like we said before, because the landscape is so incredibly tilted, you almost can't blame workers for just rationally assessing the state of affairs, looking around their community where most of the good work has been stripped out. This is the only game in town and saying, look, I don't want to mess with this thing. And, I've got complaints, I've got problems, I'd like to be treated a little bit differently. But because the bar has been set so low and the playing field is so incredibly tilted, it makes it almost impossible for these organization drives to succeed. So I think it's always really important to understand what this vote means. And let's be clear, this was a blowout. Again, they're challenging the results.
15% only, right?
Saying that the tactics that Amazon used were illegal. Maybe they'll get somewhere with that, maybe they won't. But the vote tally that we have was not close. So you should not expect that this result is ultimately going to be overturned. What does that mean? We know from the polling, unions are more popular now than they've almost ever been. So the fact that you have this massive disparity between how people feel about unions overall and the level of unionization you actually see in the workplace, that speaks to a system that is completely rigged in favor of employers and against workers actually being able to exercise their rights to unionize. One of the things that we've also talked about here that would really shift that balance and make a big difference in every step of the process is the PRO Act. Now, the Biden administration has gotten behind the PRO Act. They claim to support it. There's no indication right now that they're going to fight for it whatsoever. There was a casual mention of the PRO Act with regards to the infrastructure bill of we'd also like to see that passed too. Is that something that can go through reconciliation process? Probably not. So as long as the filibuster is in place and as long as they're not going to stretch the bounds of what the parliamentarian will allow, very unlikely that this thing is going to get through. Put that graphic back up on the screen, though, because I want you to understand how important this is and how significant it is at every level. Here's what the PRO Act would ultimately do. To start with, it would eliminate right to work. It would basically make it so that right to work is a way for workers to freeload and get the same benefits from unionization without paying in. So it would get rid of that. It would expand the universe of workers who can unionize as the economy has moved to this contract work, gig worker work, franchises saying, okay, you have to organize within your individual franchise rather than collectively as a unit across different fast food restaurants. Changing that law would be huge and really expand the playing field of what workplaces could be unionized. Would legalize some more militant tactics, things like secondary strikes and slowdowns. Really significant, again, for once you have organized, being able to actually extract concessions so that, again, when workers like this woman here who's saying, look, what are you going to be able to ultimately do for me? When you have those tools in your toolkit, then you're more able as a union to deliver for the workforce. Ban common union busting tactics, things that were used in this drive by Amazon that are still legal, that they still are allowed to do, those things would be banned. So again, it would make the playing field more level between the corporate propaganda and what the unions are bringing to the table. Also would give the NLRB more teeth so that, Amazon has in the past violated labor laws and violated union laws, and essentially they're hit with a slap on the wrist and they have to post flyers around the workplace, completely meaningless. So it would actually give the NLRB some teeth so that it means something when a company violates your rights as a worker and they have to face some sort of punitive punishment. And finally, and this is actually important too, it's a little bit complicated, but it's worth explaining. It would force contract resolutions. This, again, goes to the workers' concerns who said, look, I'm not sure that I really believe you're going to be able to deliver for me. Right now, those fears are actually pretty justified because what a corporation can do, what a boss can do in that situation is they have to pretend to enter into good faith contract negotiations with their workforce. But there's no mechanism in place to force coming to terms on a contract. So sure, they come to the table, they pretend to negotiate, then they say, we're at an impasse, we can't do anything. It reverts back to the old contract. This mechanism would force a new contract so that they no longer have that tool and the impasse is broken so that workers and the union, again, have more power so that you can actually deliver on what you're promising to this workforce. So I think this is an incredibly important moment to understand both maybe some of the failures in terms of the tactics that are being used, but more importantly, the broad landscape of why no Amazon union drive has succeeded. It hasn't happened. And that speaks to a broader societal problem and structural problem than any of the individual failures in this particular drive.
Bottom line, Amazon added almost 500,000 people to their workforce, second largest employer in the United States. I expect that only to grow even more. There's no check on their power. Zero check, actually, in terms of what they want. They're going to expand out even more to be into the urban areas in addition to already dominating rural. Grocery stores, Instacart, all that. We can expect to see a monopolization through almost every single part of the supply chain. So your question is, if they're going to start employing literally tens of millions of people, and that's not an exaggeration, especially in the next couple of years, then how do they do those people have any power whatsoever? And I think that's the question we have to answer.
That is the question. All right, we're going to tell you what's on our radar. So that's next.